Hello, 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 welcome back to another video. So, the Forbidden Sanctum is fast approaching, so I thought I will update the Blade Trap Trickster for 3.20 and give you guys some Leaguestart tips for this build. So this guide is more for a trade league, as that's what I'm playing, so keep that in mind because this involves a lot of uniques to get going, leveling uniques, but still can't rely upon this on solo self-found, so keep that in mind. So the first thing is switching to CI. One of the main things, especially if you're going to be using a Ghost Ride body armor, is to not switch to CI too early. Ghost Ride can really carry you quite far, especially if you have picked up some hybrid pieces along the way, or maybe not even hybrid pieces, energy shield, but it is really good. Gives you tons of energy shield. So unless you're confident that you will have a solid energy shield pool before switching, don't switch to CI. Make sure you have the gear before you do it, because this body armor gives you a lot of energy shield. So unless by substituting this body armor with energy shield gear, you will have the same amount of energy shield, or even more, because life still gives you some stuff, do not switch to CI too early. Make sure you have the gear before you do it. Right, the second tip, dual wield your swords. At the beginning of the league, you probably won't have the enchant or even like access to decent amount of gear. Or maybe you're lucky, maybe you're really good at this game, but like generally speaking, dual wield ephemeral's edges at the beginning because they will give you more energy shield and they will give you an extra rotation for your blade traps. Basically the same thing that the enchant does. I mean, don't look at the damage because this is calculated from the Endgame gear energy shield. But yeah, getting another ephemeral's edge is much easier than getting a good helm with the enchant plus a good shield that gives you energy shield to make up for the loss of the dual wield bonus. At the beginning, dual wield the swords until you can get to a point where the gear that you will replace this sword with will give you more benefits than what you're losing. That's my second tip. Dual wield your ephemeral edges. I'm hoping that they're not going to be very expensive. I don't see why they should be expensive. I mean, I don't know how many people are looking forward to playing blade traps at Leaguestart, but I don't think these should be too expensive. They're very low level, only level 32, so I don't think they should be too expensive, but we'll see. Right, the third thing is your belt. Bated breath is really good for this build. I was using bated breath for the longest time. The only reason why I switched to a rare belt is because, well, I felt like it really on my previous build. But bated breath, even without any corruption, but let's talk about corruptions later. Even without any corruption, it gives you a lot of stuff. And also it gives you energy shield recharge rate, which is great because we can start our energy shield recharge quite fast with the suppression because we can cut suppression pretty soon. But energy shield recharge rate is what gives you that insane sustain because you recharge your energy shield super fast. So bated breath is really good belt. And if you can get it with percentage increased effectiveness of discipline or whatever that mod is called, even better. That belt might be even your endgame belt. And if you get it for somehow with double corrupt, with like percentage increased intelligence, which would be even more min-max, it could be your endgame belt. You wouldn't need to replace this. So bated breath is a only level 22 and it's super easy, super cheap unique. You can buy the cheapest one at the beginning and then work your way up to a perfect one or with a corruption implicit, so on and so forth. This is great. Don't go straight away for a rare crafted crystal belt or whatever, because this is perfectly fine. And it's cheap and it's reliable. So the next one on the list is unique jewels in this build, okay? So you won't probably be able to get these jewels, especially early on, or who knows even how expensive they are going to be. This is not early game jewels. And considering that these guys give us ignite and shock immunity, what we can do to replace this is with new buffed normal jewels. So you wouldn't probably have any of these guys at Leaguestart or even I mean, within the first week, I just don't know how fast you guys playing, but probably I wouldn't be able to get these. If I league started within the first week, these might be quite expensive. Replacing these with normal jewels that have either the 30%, 35% reduced duration or reduced effect mod. If you stack 3 of them, you could be able to have avoidance or, I mean, no duration on ignite or shock, whichever one is the most dangerous one mod for you, and get some extra energy shield on these jewels, right? You can also technically get abyss jewels that have 50% avoidance for one of these mods, but again, I mean, this is, if I personally was playing this build again, I would still try to get these pyromaniac jewels because they're just convenient to have. And with the Pantheon, you can get the freeze immunity and less effectiveness of chill, so that's pretty good. You, with the normal new buff normal jewels, you would be able to substitute the ignite or shock immunity with like less duration or less effectiveness. Then again, you could also go for less duration. You just can't take Leaf Shade then, because it increases the ailment duration, so that would be counterproductive. Leaf Shade, personally, on this build, is only to deal with physical damage over time. It nerfs the amount of damage that you take from corrupted blood, because corrupted blood is not an ailment, so we get the benefits of Leaf Shade, but not the downside of Leaf Shade. So you have to consider this when, unless you maybe get a corrupting blood immunity, then you completely can disregard this, right? Corrupting blood immunity will negate this. I mean, it's still good against bleeding, but bleeding is not nearly as dangerous as corrupting blood on this build. Anyways, you can substitute these jewels with normal jewels and have increased energy shield on them and still get some utility out of them, which is basically, we lose the regen that we get from these, but it's still fine, right? The recharge is what really carries the sustain for this. Regeneration is good, but recharge is really the pogs part. So the last tip is that stacking energy shield matters. Gear matters. So you really do want to get as much energy shield as you can. If you want to use this build for uber bossing and want to face tank uber Cyrus's meteors, I would say don't, unless you get extra physical damage mitigation, of course, that will help always. Don't do it with less than 13k energy shield. In my opinion, that's where it becomes quite nice and comfy. At least that's how I felt when I was playing it. That's when it becomes nice and comfy to face tank and have a nice time with these uber bosses. I would still say that Uber Eater, it's a bit easier, but Uber Exarch is where you still struggle. I mean, I at least struggled a bit because of the flame ball phase. I was really terrible at dodging it, so you can only tank so many of them before you can't tank anymore. So from my experience, this build shines way more at older Uber bosses style like Maven, Cyrus, Uber Elder, and so on and so forth, which you can even do with less energy shield, except you would have to dodge more things, than at the new Uber bosses. Still doable, I still have done them, but it's just not as comfy. Another thing that you might be able to squeeze out more damage, and I did check on the skill tree, and it's possible you might maybe change the anoint, is to get another curse. So this is the old skill tree, but the new skill tree is not that much different. Instead of 3 points for Whispers of Doom, you have to spend 4 points, or you can do anoint, you lose a little bit of energy shield, you gain a bunch of damage, because on bosses especially, because of the curse buff, so you could take conductivity, for example, which would give you a bunch of extra damage. Another thing is, of course, an extra defensive curse, so like Enfeeble would also be quite good, because again, curses got buffed, and technically you could go into some of these boss fights with less energy shield just because the bosses would be doing less damage to you. We're applying our curses on this build with Arcanist brand. In my case, I only have Assassin's Mark, but if you were taking another curse, conductivity here, it wouldn't get the reduced mark effectiveness that you get from either Hex on Hit or Blasphemy support or so on and so forth, right? So we would bypass, you can level them to 20 and you would bypass the downsides of self-casting it. Obviously, in my opinion, Assassin's Mark or this whole Arcanist brand setup is only really necessary on some tougher enemies, so works out perfectly fine for our bossing prospects. So yeah, I will add this path of building on the description of the video, where you can see that I have already prepared. There are several different skill trees for leveling, and in terms of items, early mapping items, these are some okay items to basically what you should concentrate on is capping your resistances at this point. Cap your resistances, and this last flask, if you still stay as a hybrid build into maps, you just get the crustating elixir. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but this flask will be a great defensive tool because we don't really stack any chaos resistance. Until you swap to CI, this is a great tool for you to not be dying all the time because you wouldn't have a lot of life chaos damage. Right, so those are my 5 tips. Let me know if you're gonna be league starting with Blade Trap, and if you have any more questions, I will try to answer them in comments. Thanks so much for watching, and bye.